Okay. Give us a few more seconds and we will start.
Okay.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for attending our second Coffee and Conversations with ECE event. We're super excited to have our second faculty guest, Professor Vijay Subramanian. And I'm going to read a short intro. So Professor Vijay Subramanian is recognized for his outstanding contributions to research and resource allocation and learning in networks with strategic users, and for developing the senior undergraduate graduate course, Introduction to Social, Economic, and Technological Networks. He earned his PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and he joined the EECS department here in 2014. He was awarded a 2019 EECS Outstanding Achievement Award for his outstanding accomplishments in teaching, research, and service. And here is Professor Subramanian.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. So, and hello, everyone. Hopefully you're doing well. And it's great to share some of what I've been doing, what I like to do, so on and so forth with you. So please ask me questions. I think there are a bunch of questions that are already on board, but I will start with this, well, I guess a short, it's not really a presentation, more like a, as I said, a few vignettes in some sense. Okay, so in a sense, this is sort of describe where I am, what I'm interested in outside work, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions for on work type things. So, so how would I describe where I am right now? I would say it's sort of a random walk. I've never quite stayed in one place for a long enough time. So I grew up in India. When I grew up in India, my father was in the Indian Army, so we moved around every few years. We'd move, and definitely enjoyed being able to see the country growing up. It's a big country, just like the United States, not as big, but big enough that it's very hard to travel everywhere. And being able to see that as a kid was a lot of fun. Especially loved being near the Himalayas. We spent about a few, 3-4 years there. And this was on the eastern side. I've been on the other side as well. Especially we could, from where we lived, we could see on most days this peak called Kanchenjunga, which is the third highest peak in the world. So you could just see it up in the horizon if it wasn't cloudy and things. So it's a beautiful mountain. It doesn't get as much notoriety as either Everest or Karakoram 2, which is called K2, but this is equally beautiful and lovely to watch. I did my undergraduate in India in IIT Madras. It's now called IIT Chennai. And then I did a master's in the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Since then, I've mostly been in the USA, except for a small detour. Of course, like I said, it's a random walk, so I keep moving here and there. I did my PhD in Urbana-Champaign, University of Illinois. And then I just moved up a few hundred miles up north to Chicago and worked at Motorola for quite a few years. At that time, I lived in the city of Chicago. Right soon after that, we moved to Dublin, Ireland for about 4 years. And that was a little more than 4 years, actually. And that was a lot of fun. On a return back, we spent about a few months in Boston, where I was visiting MIT. And from there, we came back to Chicago. And I worked at Northwestern. And since 2014, as Sylvia said, I've been at Michigan and Ann Arbor. So I guess a good question would be, what's my hometown? I think over all these years, I mean, depending on time I spent in a place, Chicago would count the most prominently, because I spent about 11 years in there in Brick. So, and I really love the city. It's a wonderful city. There's lots of things. There's one thing that is missing, but other than that, it's got great stuff. Okay, so what are my sort of outside interests? I love running. I mean, I do biking and things as well, but running has been a primary thing. So I've run the Chicago Marathon about 3 times, New York Marathon once. I haven't run a marathon in some time, but that's something I still run regularly. I would like to go back to running a marathon sometime. Um, we love traveling. I mean, as a family, and I mean, in terms of where we go, we sometimes pick cultural spots or go out to the wilderness, and both are equally appealing. So, for example, I have a picture here of Banff National Park in Canada. This is actually from a research area that the Canadian Research Council has. It's a research station. They have conferences regularly, and this is one place I never say no to because it is, as you can see, it is just beautiful. And I've gone in all seasons. This is in the peak of winter once when it was frigid, but I've also gone in fall and it was just absolutely beautiful. And also like in early, late spring and so on and so forth. It's just an absolutely beautiful place. I've been there about 4 times and I love going there. So based on that, I love hiking, especially love mountains and also love a combination of mountains and beaches. I've been in places like in Greece, certain parts where you have beautiful mountains on one side and then the beach at the other end, or Sicily in Italy, where I'll show some photographs as well. Other things I like to do is sort of listen to a lot of music. Over the years, I listen to all kinds of music. I'm just highlighting a few things that um, um, have been long-standing interests. I guess jazz, soul music, Indian classical. I can sing some. I've had some training. I can also play the Western classical violin. Some of these talents have been a little, since working here and having young kids, it's been a little on the latent side, but I hope to pick them back up again. The other thing I really love is actually art, especially painting. I can do some, but my mother is a very good painter, so I've been interested in all kinds of art. Especially, I definitely like the Impressionists and the modern art a lot. A few painters that I have definitely enjoyed. I've seen maybe, I don't know, 200 plus paintings of Van Gogh, including in exhibitions in Chicago and in Amsterdam, various museums. Salvador Dali is someone I really like as well. I mean, I like Picasso and everyone they could think of, but some of these people are especially memorable. The Bauhaus school, where like Kandinsky and Paul Klee, these are other people I really love. I've gone to visit places and just go sit in a museum for a whole day, and that sometimes is just as beautiful and rewarding. I am a foodie. I think same with my family, but I guess we've been a little less explorative with the kids around. But every time we travel, we do make sure we try to get to the local places, and that's part of the fun of the cultural exploration. Along with like art, I also love watching art house movies, especially there are a whole bunch of these French directors who are absolutely fantastic. I haven't watched some of that in a while, but that's something that I find very interesting. I used to read a lot. Lately, it's been more technical reading. I hope to get back to more non-technical reading at times. Another thing I like to do, there are lots of sports I like to play, but one thing I have enjoyed, but I haven't actually done as much of lately, is skiing. That's one thing, it's hard to get. You can do cross-country skiing here, but not so much downhill, which is actually a lot of fun. So while I'm waiting I guess there are a bunch of questions or comments, but
there actually one question came through, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
Yep, a question, a live question was, what is your favorite, most impressive place that you visited?
So I'll mention a few from the recent ones, but I think that all depends on the context. So for example, one of the reasons I put the Banff National Park up here is I've been there 4 times and I never say no to it. And every time I go there, it's a soul enriching experience. And I never tire of that place in a sense. So yes, you could say that's one of the places I would put high on my list. Yeah. But that holds for, I mean, I had been to Yosemite as a graduate student, and then I went back 10 years hence or maybe, yeah, 10 years hence or so, or actually more than that. And it was again, mind blowing as usual. I mean, these places are, but in terms of places to go to, I think we really enjoyed Sicily last summer. I'm going to talk more about it. And I think over the years, I mean, I've loved going to Paris and France, but over the years, I've also started liking going to Italy. I think I mean, it takes a little getting used to, but I think in terms of they have fantastic food, um, excellent coffee. I mean, you couldn't go wrong almost anywhere. And there's a lot to see and do there, and including like wildlife and cultural things, obviously. So yeah, I mean, I would say that place. Greece we've enjoyed. I mean, I remember quite a few years ago going to this. I mean, we spent about 5 days in Athens, but then we went up to, there was a conference somewhere else. And then from there we traveled around, and one of the places that we went to were they excavated the tombs of King Philip, who was Alexander's father. So Philip of Macedonia. And so there's basically in this place called Vergina, they have a beautiful museum where they actually preserved the excavation and everything is in situ when you go in. Luckily, this was not looted. There were 4 tombs, 1 was looted, 3 were not. And it's beautifully preserved. It's in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And someone suggested going there, and that was, so yeah, so so all of those places have been great. I mean, long ago I'd been to Brazil. Brazil was very, very familiar because it was very much had the feel of being in India. The fruits are very much the same. Food slightly different, but the beaches are very similar to what you would find in Goa. And it's just, so there's a lot. I mean, I think, I wouldn't say I have one absolute favorite, but I think certain places are, I'd say mountains and mountains plus beaches would be one top place in a way.
Well, thank you so much. Another question kind of similar came through as well. It was, how was the experience being at different institutes from different countries, regions, all around the globe? Just being curious about what difference you felt between these institutes or academics at different regions in general.
So yeah, I think that's interesting. I think there are subtle differences. I mean, my undergraduate and graduate. So I mean, the undergraduate place, it's there at that time there was less research focus. Now I think there's a lot more research focus. The master's place was basically research focused, and there they had a lot of people coming in visiting from outside, and even more so now. It's a very active place right now. And so I think all of that is changing. Everyone is becoming more active, but I think within that context, there is a different pace. I would say it's more relaxed in certain other countries. Like Ireland is more. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed my experience there. I learned a lot. I had a lot of freedom to do what I wanted to. I met with a lot of researchers from Europe, especially from Europe. So, and I have very good contacts through that. And I feel like there's maybe the pace is similar, but I think they may be a little bit more relaxed than here. Here it is maybe a little too intense in some sense. I mean, just as a comparative point. I mean, it's how it is. Yeah. But I think it is enriching to go to different places. I mean, you get to meet different people. And we enjoyed our stay in Ireland. I mean, actually, Ireland was another place where the one beautiful thing of being in Dublin was you could, in 30 minutes, I mean, that's one thing that's hard here. In 30 minutes, you would be in mountains. Well, they call it mountains. It's not, nothing went above 1 kilometer hike, but that's high enough. You could go for a good hike. In 30 minutes, you would be out there and you would go hiking. And if you went 2 hours, you would be in extremely remote areas, and it was quite beautiful. And the western part of Ireland is very, very beautiful. So that was nice. And so people would come, I mean, visitors would come, you'd go with a visitor somewhere, and all of that was, yes, all right. So there seem to be some more questions here, I think, or chat comments. I don't know. I'm not monitoring them. So, or
Absolutely. I was wondering, did you have another slide that you wanted to
I had
share?
a few more slides, just going through some places and stuff, just to, and somewhat based on one of the questions someone had.
Okay. If you want to
Sort of a
continue
lead-in.
with the slide, and I think the question will slide right in as well, like it'll ease in. So.
All right. Okay, great. Yeah. So one of the questions that people had was, what do you do? What are the 5 things you should do in Ann Arbor? So in some sense, I would say, let's broaden that more to include Michigan. I would definitely say encourage you to go to the West, spend some time there at like maybe camping or something. For example, this is a picture from the Muskegon State Park, which is on Lake Michigan. So I lived in Chicago, which is also Lake Michigan, but the other coast. The beautiful thing of being on the eastern coast of Lake Michigan, which is the western part of the state, is that you get the most glorious sunsets, especially in the summer. This is just a glimpse of what it looks like. It is, and it stays, the sunset stays on for a very long time because the sun is setting over the lake, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And there's no, and that part of the state is has a lot more natural beauty. So going further, another place you can go slightly up. This was Muskegon State Park, which is close to a town called Muskegon. If you go further up north and actually past Grand Rapids, there is this thing called the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Shoreline. That is. So there are these dunes, basically sand collected up, mountains of sand in a way you want to think about it. That's another spectacular place. So this is a few summers ago, not 2-3 summers ago, where we went there camping. It was delightful. We had beautiful weather, and you can see what it was like, and just spectacular is the word. So these are things I would suggest. The other things I would also recommend, I'm giving you sort of Michigan type thing, go to Detroit. Now, people have this whole vision of Detroit. Detroit is an absolutely fabulous city it's a very important city for the United States. It's got a lot of history there. I mean, a lot of the industry, everything happened there, and lots of things, including going back to slavery times, where you had the Underground Railroad, where slaves would use to escape to freedom. That sort of terminated in Detroit, and they would then go over from there to Canada, and that they would be free in Canada. But so Detroit has had a lot of history in this country, and if you actually go there, the buildings are beautiful. I mean, the architecture that's preserved, you can actually go to certain neighborhoods, some absolutely fabulous houses are there as well. And it's very much like Chicago. If you go to Chicago, the architecture of Chicago it's one of the leading modern architecture cities. You'll find very similar things in Detroit as well. And Detroit has lots of good cultural things. I would highly suggest going to the Detroit Institute of Art. We've been there a couple of times. There's a beautiful, lots of good, it's very underrated, but I think it's got a good collection. Of course, places like the Art Institute of Chicago, which is only about 4 hours away, is probably slightly better because there's been more funding and more things, but I think DIA is just as good. The other thing that Detroit has is big festivals. Of course, right now is not the time to talk about big festivals, but we've enjoyed going to the Jazz Festival, which is in Labor Day. It's a free festival. They get the best musicians. There's a similar festival actually at the same time in Chicago. We used to enjoy going there, and this is just the same, or maybe a little bit more intimate, and it's nicer in some sense. And And so let me just go a little bit further. Just to give a few, what else and 5 other things in Ann Arbor. I would say wandering around campus is good. Going through the Law Quadrangle, that's another beautiful area. Other things to do, I guess Ann Arbor does have good food. I would definitely go multiple times to Zingerman's if you can. That's, I would say, the excellent food. And they also take very good care of their employees. So it's worth supporting them. The other things are lots of parks in Ann Arbor. Some of them are very nice. I mean, there are small ones to fairly good ones, big ones where you can wander around quite a bit. The Arboretum is one of them, which is in town. I usually run through it, though I haven't done that recently. Or you could go to the Botanical Garden. That's also beautiful. There's lots of wandering you can do there. But in general, you can wander around campus. I think it's quite, it's a massive campus. I wouldn't say, I think it's probably one of the largest campuses in terms of square footage. And it's just good to wander around and see different buildings at different times of the year. The Museum of Natural History is fabulous. That's another thing I would say. The university itself has a modern art museum, which is nice. It's small, but it's nice. It's got lots of, if you're interested, it has a few Picassos, it has some Modiglianis, and it has a few other things. Obviously, it's not going to be as big as the Art Institute or DIA, but it's fairly respectable. So those are from my point of view. And then, so Ann Arbor also has lots of festivals in the summer. Of course, this summer is an odd thing. If you are here in the summer, lots of summer festivals, and those are actually a lot of fun as well. A lot of good music, and they bring good artists, and so you can sit down. And it's usually around the university, so be around Rackham, in fact, where the graduate school is. And it's a nice stage. You sit down. It's beautiful. You can get food, or you can buy food there, or bring your own food as well. So let me just transition now, just to show a few other sort of places we've been. This is just going to be last few years, just to give a sense of. So quite a few years ago, we had gone to Spain. This was for a conference, and then we traveled around a bunch with the family. And we ended up going to the Alhambra in Granada. And it's actually a beautiful place. For those, I mean, coming from India, people talk about the Taj Mahal. And the Alhambra was actually built about 100 years before the Taj Mahal. The work, and there's a particular palace called the Nasrid Palace, which is just as gorgeous, as beautiful as the Taj Mahal. And it's definitely worth seeing. It's hot there. It was nice. We enjoyed it, and so that was one. So yeah, if you go for a conference or something in the summer, we try to sort of take a family trip along with that, and this is one of those. A few summers after that, I actually gone to Edinburgh for a conference. Only me, I went. Edinburgh is is in Scotland. It's like Ireland, except it's even more fabulous. The mountains are actually much taller. So with some friends who I knew lived there, I mean, when the conference was done, I stayed a few days more, and we went hiking. And the mountains above a certain height, I think it's 1 kilometer or something. They're called Mornes, Mornes, and there are maybe 900 or no 600, 700 Mornes. When people normally say I've climbed a morn, they call it bagging a morn. And so with these friends, I went up, and for Scotland, if you've never lived in those parts of the world, getting a day like this, which is pretty much cloud-free, is extremely rare. And that whole week was cloud-free and beautiful. Edinburgh is another city I really like. For those of you who follow Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, I mean, she lives in Edinburgh, and she wrote the books there. You can actually go through the coffee shop where she sat and wrote the books. In any case, this is another, so this was a nice, maybe a whole day hike, which was a lot of fun. Then last summer we were in Sicily, and that I think I really enjoyed Sicily. And this is a view from one town called Taormina, which had the G7 and various things. It's a beautiful. It's placed about 600 meters above sea level, and you can get to see the bay. Got lots of cafes, and I mean, it's just a fabulous place. One picture from there. The highlight actually I mean, there were a couple of highlights. One was going up Mount Etna, which is the active and one of the active volcanoes in Italy and the highest volcano in Europe. We also drove around some old Greek ruins and went to Syracuse, which is the home place of Archimedes. And so there's a lot of cultural things there. Absolutely beautiful food. There's no comparison. In fact, it was such that our son refused to have milk when we came back here. He liked the milk there a lot better. Our highlight was actually going to these islands called the Aeolian Islands, or Isole Aeolia. There's about 7 islands. They are to the northwest of, I mean, they're very close to Sicily. They're northwest of there. There was a workshop in those islands. Those are volcanic islands. I mean, the first picture is from something called a Vulcan. So volcano comes from this island, Vulcan, comes from that terminology. This is an extinct volcano. But on these islands, as you can see it a little bit further, this last picture actually captures all the islands. So we stayed in this main town called Lipari, main island called Lipari. You go to Volcano and other places. There's one which is furthermost out called Stromboli. Stromboli is an active volcano. In fact, it was erupting a couple of times when we were there. You could take a boat close to it. So my wife and my daughter went. I didn't go because I was taking care of my son. But that's a highlight to go some other time.
Professor, we got a question real quick.
Sure.
The question is, what kind of camera do you use for your great panoramic pictures?
Oh, this was very basic. This was just using an iPhone. We did have a good camera. It's about time I need to get a newer one, but I think with the kids, we've just been going with the phones. And the phones have been getting a lot better, as you can see, and especially if the light is as good as this, there's no problem at all. So the last thing I wanted to end up, I think this is my last one. Sorry. We also ended up last summer going to Nova Scotia. I've never been to that part, so it's much further east but in Canada. And so you're on you're past Eastern time zone. You go into what's called Atlantic time zone, these are islands. There's an island called Cape Breton Island, where there is a beautiful park there, a Cabot Trail. So we did some of that, but we didn't hike as much as we'd want to in the future. That's what we'd like to do. We stayed in this town called, we had, again, gorgeous weather. And this was in August. Quite surprising. Basically, no rain, cloud-free skies. And we stayed in this town called Badek. Badek actually has an interesting history. It was where Alexander Graham Bell retired after he made his money on the telephone. And there he actually did a lot of interesting things, like break the land speed record. I mean, he was doing all kinds of inventing stuff even when he retired there. But in general, we enjoyed being in that part of Canada. That's all my presentations. I can just answer questions from now on. There's no.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. So one of the last kind of questions in regards to traveling is, are there pros and cons to being in Europe versus USA? Does it seem as if there's not much collaboration or common interest along the Atlantic? At least it could be better.
No, I think there's a lot of research that happens. I mean, I've worked with many researchers. Like, I still interact with my Irish colleagues. There are people in France I interact with. In fact, for some of my students, defense committees, there were people from France, Paris, and their on their committees actually. I hope to, if and when we take a sabbatical, plan to go somewhere like Europe, just to, I mean, because I know those researchers, I want to work with them more closely. So the people I know there tend to be more on the math side. They're applied mathematicians or mathematicians, but they are very well known here. A lot of people have collaborations with them. I mean, not just in Michigan, I meant broadly in the United States.
Thank you so much. We're going to get into the meat of your research. So we had a question that says, in your research summary on your page, you list a recent interest in economic modeling of socio-technological systems and networks. What types of socio-technological networks are you most interested in specifically? And what sparked this interest?
So I guess one of the things was I think some of it comes from my advisor. I think it's the fact that he sort of works in every 7 years at doing something new, and this whole, you could say this there is that thing on the back of my mind always, and part of it is an eagerness to learn new things. I mean, that's how you keep yourself vulnerable. You're a lifelong learner. You look at new topics, but here too it was sort of driven by I think things like technology basically. So if you look at it, there are so many more things that we do. We interact with many more things than say 20 years ago, through smartphones, through whatever, I mean, Google searches, whatnot. And in some sense, in all of these dimensions, there's technology has made it sort of natural to ask these questions as to what is happening here. And so I was curious about that, and I'm sort of, and actually it's an important, it's not just looking at these in designing engineering systems. These are going to be more important. We have lots of sensors deployed everywhere. There'll be many more sensors when you go to IoT or whichever. And these questions come in: what type of measurements should you send? How should you take actions? Are these sensors, is someone spoofing those things? I mean, there's a whole host of questions this opens up, and these are all very much of the same line, because you get, so you can think of your interactions in a social media. You get messages from someone. Should I trust those messages or not? Do I think it's a real message or not? Do I trust this person because I feel there's a certain reputation to that person? Same concerns sort of translate to designing engineering systems and running them as well. So in a sense, I wanted to understand some of these things better, say how information flows over networks, how people take actions. The mathematics was challenging and interesting as well. So that's another motivation. I was learning new things. And it turns out, I mean, after having done a lot of that, I think these are people whom we can call economists or game theorists, or and sometimes some of them computer scientists also. They have done a lot of deep thinking on these things, and I think it's good to appreciate what they've done and see how that is useful in these systems. So I mean, I gave another example where this comes in is, if you look at energy systems, the way the power systems are going in most countries is basically there is a market that drives the prices. It's not set by some regulator, but it's, in some sense, it changes with the demand. And so there are levels of market. So in the US, you have what's called a 6 month ahead long-term market, which just looks at seasonal things, and it's very predictable. Then you have something based on that. Then you say, okay, you have a day ahead market, which says, what do you predict your demands are going to be tomorrow, and who can supply that demand? And this is done across the country in every place. So your providers like DTE or whatnot would say, okay, I need so much demand, and then the generators would say, I can bring this much demand. And they would actually be a bidding going on, saying, okay, I can provide at this cost, this much, that cost. I can And that helps you set the prices that the consumers don't directly see these prices, but overall, not just in as your prices going down in a month, you can sort of see what is happening. There's a reaction to this. And then there's a third market, which is a real-time market. What happens is the one day-ahead market is still predictions. And this is where, so things like we do basically estimate using time series, you know what you expect. You know what you expect every half an hour. And then before that half an hour comes in, you sort of see, okay, suddenly was there, suddenly did the temperatures actually go up more than what they had. So the ACs are going to run more. So suddenly the demand is increased and I need to serve this demand. So you need to go out and ask some generators to provide that supply. And so on. So there are things of this kind that come through. And so that's a transaction that happens. And this is done quite regularly. And the grid especially is an interesting object because what the physics of it runs on Kirchhoff's laws. That's what we know. But because we have some storage capability, but not of the same kind, what has to happen is, unlike certain things, what they call is the demand and the supply, they have to meet each other at every given time, which is different from many other systems. And otherwise, what will happen is some transformer will blow somewhere, some circuits will fry. All of these issues, and there are certain other constraints that are brought into the physical system. But nevertheless, it is a place where these socio-technological economic aspects come into play together. And to understand some of these things, you have to go back and study some of those topics and then apply it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think this is kind of like a second part to the first question, but it said, the question is, how can this be applied in a practical matter? Do you have any types of simulations, or is your research focused on theory?
So I hope I convinced you that these things are relevant in the practice. Another example I can give you is, now you do a Google search, what happens on the back end? Of course, Google is doing the search algorithm, but you see all these ads as well. Google is actually, for every search you're doing, Google's conducting an auction to display the ads. So now so you have to ask questions is, okay, how is the bidding process done? That's actually their biggest source of revenue and profit is the ad revenue. So it's nothing, so should it matter how these ads are presented and who should bid? But you also have to do this on scale. As I said, things that happen. So it's a nice confluence of mathematics of the kind where how these auctions are constructed, but also of algorithms. Basically, because I want things to run at scale, Google has, millions of searches happening every minute or maybe second, and I have to run an auction for every search. I don't have the time to sit and work on computing something really complex. It has to be done very fast. Right. So I think, so coming back to, so all of these things I think are very, so there, you can make a lot of practical impact by studying these problems. And another thing that is very relevant is how information flows. So there is a lot of work I've been looking at fads and how they occur, how they spread, how maybe fake news spread, so on and so forth, or in terms of COVID, how disease would spread, or what sort of interventions would cause. It's not so much the medical sense, but in terms of if you control how people travel or how they mix, how can that influence things? So all of these things can be studied, and these mathematical models, they will obviously are models, so they will miss the fine details, but they can give you high-level principles, guidelines as to what to do. And in terms of what I'm interested in is sort of more the foundational, fundamental aspects of this. So coming up with basic guidelines or methodologies to answer these questions in a broad sense, or give broad tools to sort of study these problems. Widely applicable algorithms that will apply in broader contexts and so on and so forth. So it does concentrate mostly on the theory. I mean, we try to give provable guarantees and things, but we also, I mean, the back of the mind, I am in the engineering department. So in fact, actually all the mathematicians also do this. They are in, I mean, it's problems get defined from real world, otherwise for the most part. And so, yes, we do simulations and sometimes we do some number crunching, sometimes it will be using data as well. But largely the work is more theory-based, yes.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, how do you find students to work with you?
So I've had a mix of means of recruiting students, some directly from the applicant pool who apply for the PhD programs or various things. I've also had a few students, I mean, about maybe a third to maybe close to half of my group, 40% at least, that has come through the master's program who've taken courses with me, or not, maybe not with me, but they've taken with my colleagues and they've suggested, hey, if you want to work with you. So they've probably worked with me over the summer, and then I feel like they've done well, and then I've asked them to apply to the PhD program. So that's, I've also, I mean, there have been some master's students who've done some projects with me as well. Some of them went to a different place for graduate studies, but and I've also worked with undergraduates in some of the courses I've taught. I've offered these program projects using what's called SURE, which is the Student Undergraduate Research Experience. And I managed to recruit some students from that pool as well.
Thank you so much. Kind of branching off of that, got a question that says, what is your favorite course to teach?
That's a good question. So the course I like to teach is the one I developed, which is not going to be offered this fall, unfortunately, but that's a difference. It's the 444-544, the one that you mentioned, which was analysis of social networks. But I've been teaching 502, which is advanced stochastic processes. That's the course I like as well. And there are some courses I have in mind. I guess those would be my favorite courses to teach, in a sense. I want to teach them because these are nice, interesting topics. Maybe something on online learning, or I had a PhD level course on large-scale analysis of probabilistic analysis of large-scale systems. That's something that I like to teach too. So I would say a mixture of sort of introductory courses of the kind that I mentioned, 544-444. Also something like 557, which is communication networks, which I had modified quite a bit. And some of the advanced ones as well. So I wouldn't say I have a particular favorite course, but I think maybe if you want to ask me to say which is my favorite course, which is the next new course I'm going to teach.
Thank you. We got a live question. It was, if you were to switch to industry, which area or company would you choose? Where do you think most interesting and good research is happening?
So yeah, if I were to switch to go to industry, I think there are lots of, I mean, the kind of work I've been doing would fit in very well with all the big players you can think of, the Googles, the Facebook, Amazon, even places like Uber. I mean, there are lots of these market type questions there. But even some startups, which is surprising, but it will be the case. So, I mean, I worked in industry for a bit. I think that I saw one of the questions is, and I do have, I mean, I have a sense of what is needed in industry, and you have to, in the sense you need things to work, right? So you have to make cut corners in a sense, but that doesn't mean you cannot do it in terms in a more using foundational principles. In fact, some of the really good things come out of that. So for my experience and my working at Motorola, I joined there in late '99. It was I mean, in retrospect, it was a great time. Not so much Motorola. Motorola as a company was on its in 7 years or 8 years, it was basically out of existence. But in terms of the industry, the wireless industry was just finishing. I mean, they were mostly used to voice. Data was just coming on. And these are the days of edge, GPRS. I mean, I know the kids today won't know what these things mean, and you're used to downloading videos on your phone and watching and maybe even looking at this call over that. But how do you engineer this? And this was something that they were used to. When I meant voice, they were used to basically another old ancient thing for today's students is you had the dial-up phones, and those are basically what's called circuit switched. And that's what these companies were used to. They knew how to build those systems. They didn't know how to build wireless data systems. And one of the things that they were doing in some sense was for every new technology or new standard that came in, they would start from scratch. And one of the things that viewpoints we took was underlying all of this there is lots of commonality. So why don't you take an abstract viewpoint, come up with a framework that can apply, that can grow with as the technology changes. And that's basically what we use to develop algorithms in my time at Motorola. In fact, I think that same framework is still being used today, and I left there in 2006 or so. So, I mean, part of the thing of approaching some of these things from these viewpoints is the longevity, the fact that it's configurable, it can adapt, and so on and so forth is important.
We had another question that ties really well with the previous question. It was, how was the transition from industry setting back into academia? What advice would you give to beginning graduate students who aren't entirely sure if they want to pursue industry or academia after graduation?
So that's a tricky question. I think it's not easy. The transition, so I would say the transition from academia to industry is easier than the other way around. And part of it is it's just the metrics are all different. Even academia to industry is harder if you're unless you're in hot areas. I mean, if you're now doing data science, you can easily go and come back. You can spend 2 years there, 3 years there, and so on and so forth, come back. And some people actually would like to be in industry because you may actually have access to real data as opposed to and oodles of it as opposed to getting very sparse amount of data here. Right. So in terms of the advice, I think so yes, when people are graduating, they're looking for a job, and that's always the thing to do. Yes, and the job may not be. When you take a job, you may have only one offer, so you just take that job, I guess. But nevertheless, I think from my limited experience, this is all anecdotal, obviously, is that I think industry is looking for anywhere, actually, not just industry, even academia. They're looking for people who can generate new ideas. And yes, so when you start off, you may be a cog in the wheel, but if you have ideas and you can convince people that it actually has merit, slowly it can get developed into something big. And they would be eventually interested in leaders coming out of this. Leaders are people, I mean, they could be, it's not just a manager type thing. Leader could be someone who's a thought, who gives new ideas, comes up with new products. And especially companies, I mean, this was the case with Google when it was growing in some sense. There were a lot of people with lots of good ideas they still have very smart people, but it's a behemoth now. They may not all know where their good ideas are. But nevertheless, they still have very good ideas coming through. And especially when they were growing, I think that was a place where lots of people were coming up with lots of good ideas. And I mean, those tend to have longevity. And I mean, of course, not all ideas have to pan out. I mean, it's like but unless you come up with new things, it's not, you have to try things out. So I would also say, yeah, if you're going wherever, whatever you're doing, going with an open mind is important. You have to be willing to, I guess, adapt and do new things, grow intellectually, grow in what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Since we have a few more minutes left, this will probably be our last question, but it's a great one to end on. It is, do you have any tips for international students to help them with the transition to a new culture, new campus, and possibly new language?
Yeah, that's interesting. So when I moved to the US, I guess English wasn't a problem because I mean, like in India, many of us studies English from elementary school almost. And a lot of our education in undergraduate is in English. Of course, it's still Indian English in a way. So there's a transition there. But I think in general, it's good to have an open mind. Of course, you will have people. I mean, you can still be with your own culture, which is obviously that's a good. You should interact with people you grew up with, or your own where country you came from, because that is a comforting thing. But you should also have the thing you should also go out of your comfort zone and try to meet new people. I mean, when else will you do it? When you're back and when you're 60 years old and you're thinking about your grandchildren, you will not do it then. So you would do it when you're young, when you have time to explore. So then, and the other thing to do, I mean, yes, it's challenging, you're taking courses, all of those things are definitely important, but in a way, try to see what other things the university has to offer in terms of activities, and those are enriching. I mean, for example, one thing you can do as a student, again, this year is a different but typically you can go UMS, which is University Music Society. It offers very cheap tickets to your students. I mean, and you get to see fabulous artists. I mean, the really top artists, you're going to see them for $10 or something. It's unbelievable. If you were to pay actual market prices, you'd be paying $100 to see them. And so you can avail of such facilities. There's lots of all sorts of activity groups. I know some of my students are playing bridge. I mean, it's one game I used to play as a graduate student, but I haven't, or undergraduate also, but I haven't since. So all of these activities I think are good. But of course, with balance. I mean, you are here to educate yourself. You're here to do well. You're in a foreign place. You have to figure out dinner, food. I mean, all of these things are challenging. But at the same time, you should also, like I said, get a little bit out of your comfort zone. That's when you sort of appreciate new cultures, new people. And you get more comfortable being here too, in that sense. It comes from that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we have actually one last question we can squeeze in.
Sure.
And it was, what is the most interesting experience you had since you worked at ECE department here at University of Michigan?
Most interesting experience. I mean, interesting as in eye-opening, or is it interesting as in?
I think either you can take it as you wish.
So I think one thing was this past, actually in January, maybe there was some workshop I'd gone to in the college where they were taking they're basically doing a survey of the students, and it's sort of nationwide with some specifics at University of Michigan as well. And it was just surprising to see the level of, I mean, not to end at this note, but in terms of, I would say, challenging, surprising, interesting, as in it's something we should cater to, is the levels of anxiety and stress in students, and how across the board, and I'm sure it's there in the graduate students as well. Survey upon survey, we see some of these things coming through. It's a challenging world, and I think that all adds to it. And not clear I have any solutions to it or how to deal with it, but I would, I mean, I hazard to say that, oh, it was different when I was, but I think it was maybe a little, we were all allowed to be more naive for longer in some senses. Maybe that's how I'd put it. And I feel like that's a little less now, and that's interesting or surprising. I mean, all my other positions, I hadn't seen that as much because I hadn't interacted so much with students. As at Northwestern, I was a research faculty. I would teach once in a while, but you don't interact as much with students. And in Ireland, it was a research institute. There were graduate students, but then you didn't have to necessarily teach them and stuff. So I think in that sense, the last few years of seeing all of that is, yeah, it is challenging. I don't, yeah. And I feel like maybe that was the interesting or surprising thing. I feel like students are not allowed to be naive for as long as we were allowed to.
Well, thank you so much, Professor, for being our second faculty guest. We really appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us today. We will have a recording of it that should be available, and I hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you again, and we'll hopefully see you at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks. Bye-bye.